Hey everybody, figured I would update everybody. We made a video on this thing when we were, about middle of the way through it and working on the plumbing and electrical. We got it all finished up and fired off yesterday. So I figured I'd kind of go over everything we did with this one. So this is absolutely the most intricate car that we've ever done as far as plumbing and wiring. So this is Alan's Monte Carlo. It's a drag and drive car. It will drive on pump gas and race on methanol, pump gas or E85. So it is a 570-inch SMX from Steve Morris, 24 injectors, dry sump. It's a twin turbo, turbo 400. I mean, this thing's just, it's got it all. This is a really, really cool car. So we plumbed it and we wired it, and the previous video I made on this, I went over the cooling system plumbing of this engine. It's rather intricate, and some of the fuel system plumbing, but we tried to make this as easy for him to work on as possible, even though it won't be easy to work on. It's just, there's just so much stuff in it, right? So when he wants to drive it on pump gas, down here, kind of hard to see, but this is your methanol fuel pump. It's cam driven. There's a spud in there. So he'll have to remove that V-band clamp, slide this pump back, and that's why this hose is built the way it is, as well as the feed to the pump, so that you can remove it, slide it out of the way, and then pull the spud out and then bolt it back up. The spud actually drives the fuel pump. So with the spud out of it, it doesn't drive the fuel pump. And then he can just cruise it on pump gas, and the fuel pump's not spinning. This is his methanol tank. We did a direct mount for the regulator. Very tight quarters in here, but basically it comes out of the pump into the filter housing, out of the filter housing into a Y that goes underneath the intake manifold and feeds the back of the rails back there, and then out of goes through the rails and then comes to these two fronts right here. And then these are our returns to the regulator. There's a lot of hose and fittings and push lock and a whole bunch of stuff on this car. So we tried to label everything that could potentially get mixed up. So, this one's made to go to the methanol regulator. And then there's where it goes on the intake manifold is labeled. Same thing with dome pressure. This comes from the CO2 tank, or from the boost control solenoids, I'm sorry. And then over here, crosses over to the other side of the gate. Got a dome pressure sensor over there. So what we did is we tried to make everything as easy to understand if you're thrashing and trying to put this thing back together. So there is a lot of everything in this car. And when you're on the side of the road trying to fix something, the last thing you want to do is be fumbling trying to figure out which hose you took off and where it's supposed to go. So we tried to make it a little bit easier. A little tip for y'all that are doing this yourself: a little 1/2-inch heat shrink printer works really, really well on push lock stuff. Also does a good job of holding the high temp sleeve over top of the hose. So so let's look at the rest of the car. This car's got a smart wire, a Dominator, 2 injector driver modules, a Pro 600, and oh, look at that. Did everybody notice that? When the door opened, the interior lights came on. So this is a cool thing about the smart wire, right? We got a door jam switch. We got one on either side, but it kicks the interior lights on. And the smart wire kind of gives you the ability to do a lot of things that you can't do with a traditional relay or relay board. So all the electronics are mounted up underneath of here. Really difficult to see, but we wanted to have this as hidden as possible and still give them enough foot room, for the passenger. So then we've got his all of his CO2 related stuff back here on this panel here. So boost control, shifter, shoot release, all that kind of stuff. And then we've got the shifters in the factory center console. Alan did a really good job of making that fit in there. We've got the 6.8 Pro Dash over here. And then we put some USB bulkheads here. The top one over here is for the ECU. The bottom one over there is for the smart wire. And then this side, we've got the VPS and the profiler. So if he needs to plug into anything, this cord will be in the glove box as well as his, wallet and whatnot, or whatever he puts in there. And you just pull this cord out and you can connect to all 4 devices without having to screw around and try to remember what cord's what. So on the back side of those USB bulkheads, if he ever pulls it out, they're all labeled so he knows where to plug them back in at. It's kind of hard to see back behind the dash, and we don't really need to get into it, but there's a lot of everything back behind this thing. So let's go over some of the functionality with the smart wire. So as you saw, a door switch will turn on the interior lights, right? And there's also another switch. I'll go over and hit it. You sit there. There's also a factory dome light switch. So if you don't have the door open, but you want to try to find your gloves or whatever it is, here's your dome light switch. We incorporated the factory turn, factory marker, factory headlight, factory high beam switch down on the floor, and we programmed it all to work as if this was a factory car. So we have power door locks, and we got power windows, but the power windows don't work. Why don't the power windows don't work? Well, it's because the ignition is not on. So if we turn the ignition on, now we have power windows, just like a factory car. So we didn't want the ignition to run the power, or we didn't want the power windows to run with the ignition off, because that's not the way a factory car works. But the door locks have to work with the ignition off. So once the ignition is on, the power windows will work. That's a programming condition in the smart wire. So another cool thing you can do with the smart wire, if we look out the front of the car, towards the front bumper, we got headlights on, right? So the headlights are on, just like a factory car, but if I turn the ignition switch off, the headlights go off. So notice, if you look in here, this headlight switch is still on, but the ignition switch is off. So when we turn the ignition switch back on, bingo, we've got headlights. So if you were to park the car and forget to turn your lights off, the headlights won't stay on. Now the marker lights will, because the marker lights have to be engaged for hazards, and this is his factory hazard switch. So the hazards will continue to work even though when you turn off the ignition, the hazards are still going to work. And the reason being is that if you broke down on the side of the road, you don't leave the ignition on. So the hazards are going to stay on, they're going to stay flashing. We put all LED bulbs in the whole car, so it's not a big amperage draw deal. So let's turn the hazards off, let's turn the ignition on. So I showed you some of the other switches that will turn on these interior lights, but there's a pretty cool function that we did with this car. Let's look in the trunk and I'll show you. So next thing we did, here's his trunk. We have trunk lights on, okay? So the trunk lights are independent of the interior lights. They use just a standard little trunk switch right here, right? Well, this trunk switch is an input to the smart wire. So this trunk switch is telling the smart wire whether it's open or closed, and then we use an output from the smart wire to turn on this light, which gives us multiple conditions. There's an additional keypad button up in the car that if I turn it on, the trunk lights will work no matter if this is open or closed, right? So that means if this little switch was to fail, something stupid happened, we can still override it. The one cool thing that I think we did, I'm very happy with how we did this, is we used a CO2 tank from Motion, but we used a automatic shutoff valve from Biondo, and then we used a dual port regulator, and we put a 1600 PSI Rife sensor in that dual port regulator. That dual port regulator gives 100 pounds of pressure to the boost control and shifter and all that, but it gives 200 pounds of pressure to the chutes. So the idea here is that this trunk's got struts on it for the wing. It's not exactly easy to get into. So what we wanted to do was, there's no reason for him to go into the trunk in between passes and whatnot. So the idea is to be able to turn on the CO2 and leave it on the whole time. It's not gonna leak because it's only gotta go to this automatic shutoff valve. So, I'm gonna show you something we set up. Let's go and look at the computer here on the inside of the car. So I'm gonna shut this. The CO2 bottle right now is shut off, okay? So, what we did, if we look inside, with the smart wire, is we programmed the interior lights to turn on if you turn on the master enable switch, which is your boost master enable, the switch he's gonna press before he makes a pass, but it doesn't see CO2 pressure. So I'm gonna show you how that works, right? This switch right here, you hear the solenoids? So that's your boost master enable. That arms everything. Well, the interior lights just came on. The doors are shut. They shouldn't be on, right? Well, the reason the interior lights came on is because the CO2 bottle isn't open. So that master enable arms that CO2 bottle opener, but doesn't physically turn the dial, right? So we got the interior lights are on. So if he's up there making a burn, does his burnout, goes to stage, presses the master enable, and the light turns on, he knows, hey, and his crew should know, hey, nobody opened the CO2 bottle today, right? So, stay there looking at the interior lighting. I go back here, I open up the CO2 bottle, so we have pressure, and now our interior light is off. Pretty slick, right? So, once we have CO2 pressure on the circuit, it shuts the interior light off.
It's fucking fancy.
Laura thinks that's fancy. The interior lights still work if you open the door, okay, or if you hit the switch over there. But he knows now, hey, this bottle isn't open. So when he presses that master enable, if we have less than 500 pounds, or whatever we program it to, in the CO2 bottle, it kicks on the interior light. If it kicks on the interior light, we know we have a problem. So he doesn't even have to waste the pass. Now, turn the master enable off, obviously nothing changes. So thought that was a pretty slick feature that Justin and I came up with. The remote opener, or remote solenoid, is controlled also by that master enable switch. So when you turn that master enable switch, it opens up that valve back there, arms your shifter, arms your chute, arms your boost control, does all that, and then it follows timers that we program into the ECU. So it's pretty slick. I'm pretty happy with how it came out. This way he can't screw up. So another little touch we did. He's got a little, USB charging port here in the dash with a readout for voltage, and then it's actually a 90-watt version, so you can charge a laptop on it. I have the same one in my car. Worked great. Mine's got a blue background. This car's green, so I ordered him a green background one. Now, something else you can do with the smart wire that you can't, becomes difficult to do with a standard relay, right? So look at the taillights back here. So when I turn on a turn signal, so first I'm going to turn on the marker lights, right? So now we have marker lights, just standard, nothing fancy marker lights, right? When we turn on a turn signal, you won't hear a flasher because it's built into the smart wire, but there's our left turn. Well, the problem typically when you're pulling a little miniature trailer and you got an older car like this is that your turn signals and brake lights are on the same bulb. So the way we set this up is it will switch over to solid for brake on the right side, right? So you still have functionality on the same bulb. It's all in programming in the smart wire. So when he plugs his mini trailer into this thing with a 4-pin plug, done, don't have to worry about it. So no converter, no little 2-wire, 3-wire, 3-wire to 2-wire converter. It's all built into the smart wire. Pretty slick. So the trunk switch also, if we look under the car, the trunk switch under the car, the trunk switch also kicks on the lights for the shies. So then there's an additional override switch inside of the car that'll turn on all the lighting. So I know I've been talking a bunch about lighting, but when you're on the side of the road, lighting's a pretty big deal. So, let's see. All the factory panels will go back in the car. We just have to put the back seat in, which is a total nightmare. And what Laura doesn't know is I'm gonna make her slip into the back seat there and try to plug in the rear power windows, because neither Justin or my arm fits in there to look up, to plug them in. So this thing is just about done. We're gonna work on the pump gas side of things. I've already got it up and running on methanol, taking throttle, you know, probably pretty close to either hit a dyno or a racetrack. And then I'm gonna work on the street tune, which is a good bit more difficult to do than the race tune. So in the trunk, some of the other cool things that are in the trunk, this is just an Aeromotive 3.5 gallon per minute drop-in fuel cell module, fuel level, yada yada. The fuel level, when it gets low, we can program it to do whatever we want, whether it be flash a light on the dash, flash interior lights, whatever we want to do. This is just unplugged for right now just because this is completely empty. There's no fuel in this thing and I don't want this pump to run dry. So we have 2 full spectrum P2000 batteries in the car. These batteries are beasts. I run 1 in my own car. 2 of them is going to last forever. We run one of our alternators on the deal to keep them charged once it's running. So he has a ton of reserve capacity in this thing. All the hose, all the fittings, all that is all crimped. It's all Brown & Miller. We did it all in-house. We're going to go up underneath of the car and show you the amount of work that's involved in going underneath, or amount of work that's underneath of this car. So hold on 1 second and we're going to go underneath. All right, so now we're up in the driver's side inner fender well. So we ran all of our hoses and wiring and whatnot up there. But if we look back here, what we did is we mounted a Motion radiator puke tank back here in the corner. So if it pukes back here, he can drain it, whatnot. We've got over here, we've got Mad Racing EGT bulkheads right here, line lock, and then our Pro 600 coils are all through there, are all up over there. We got remote start buttons. Let's go to the other side. And up here we have a 12 AN hose, which is our breather for the dry sump tank, and it comes back here to a direct thread 45 to an additional Motion puke tank with filter. So if the dry sump tank has to vent, it vents into this tank instead of just venting to the atmosphere or to a filter that looks all gross and disgusting. A Amphenol Sherlock connector here for pass-through for power, the Mad Racing EGT bulkheads here, another starter button, and more CDI coils. So in the fender well, it's kind of hard to see, but if we look straight in, spark plugs are way up here. It's actually going to be the easiest to change plugs by just going in through the fender well as opposed to underneath the car. So let's go up a little bit further with the lift and look underneath the car. All right, now we're under the front end. The front bumper's halfway on. I'm gonna wait for Justin to get here tomorrow. He's got a little bit smaller arms and he can fit his arm up in there. So up in the front bumper, we have a Peterson oil filter. This is after the Clearview filter. So it comes out of the oil pump through the Clearview filter, out of the Clearview filter through this Peterson filter, and then out of this Peterson filter, and it goes up to a oil cooler, an engine oil cooler, which is right there. So this is our engine oil cooler, comes out of here and goes into the engine. So over here on this side is our transmission cooler. The larger of the two is our trans cooler. So we ran all the hoses up into the, if we look over here, right there, we ran them all up and through the frame rail, right? And then they run to the back of the car, or to the transmission back here. So we've got our drain lines, we've got our lower radiator hose, -20 AN from Brown & Miller. And then here's our alternator tucked up in here. We've got This is feed power for each fan is right here. The fan is from Delta PAG, the fan system, and it has its own built-in controller, which is what we're using. Then we have underneath it here the dry sump tank or the dry sump pump, belt, all that kind of stuff. So we had to, change the way that the pickup was aligned with the crank trigger. Same thing with the cam sync. But let's look at some other stuff up under here. So back up in here to get the plugs is a little bit difficult, but I think Alan's got some skinny arms. I think he's gonna be able to access them pretty easily. So we number all the plug wires so that it's easy on both ends, right? So you can pull them all the way off, throw them on a bench, and put them back on the car, and you should know back where they go. So we also have back here, I think I covered this in my last video, this is the fuel filter from Motion for pump gas, right? So this is the pump gas fuel filter, and our feed lines come out of here and go to the back of the intake manifold. This is actually our return line right here. This 8AN is a return. And it comes back along the side of the car. It goes back along the side of the car and back to a flex fuel sensor from Motion. And then, it goes up underneath the trunk. So we're gonna finish this video off. The next one we do, I'm gonna go over some of the tuning and functionality of this car to hopefully teach y'all something. Have a good one.